It's Saturday. If you're an F1 fan, you know exactly what that means. It means it's qualifying day and we're going to be back in F1 in sunny Australia for the first time in nearly 3 years. F1 has returned to Australia, to Melbourne, to Albert Park, and qualifying, as we know, is already over, but we are here to take you through some of the reactions and analyze what exactly happened to a return to a very new looking Albert Park, a circuit that has been retooled to make it quicker and has also been given additional DRS zones. Now, as we know, it's Charles Leclerc of Ferrari who has taken pole position in this particular race. In fact, this is the second time he's taken pole this season. The only other time he missed out was, of course, at Saudi Arabia, where Sergio Perez took pole. Max Verstappen, the man who many see as his main title rival and the current world champion, the defending world champion, finished in second. But he finished nearly 300ths of a second behind Leclerc, who was on an absolute flyer on Q3. Did a very, very good job to put that car on pole. The same can't be said about his teammate Carlos Sainz, his Ferrari teammate, as we know, who, due to some bad luck, ended up in 9th place. So it's not going to be a Ferrari front row lockout. In fact, they're not even going to be occupying both the first and second row. As a result, it's Sergio Perez, Verstappen's teammate, who's going to be in third. Now, let's take a quick look at what exactly this means in terms of, like, we know that Red Bull and Ferrari are the fastest cars, but what was very interesting to see was that this time around in Q3, there were only 5 teams, and those 5 teams pretty much are the teams that many see would be competing for the top 5 position in the Constructors' Championship. You had both Ferraris, you had both Red Bulls, you had both Mercedes, you had both McLarens, and you had, very surprisingly, both Alpines. Now, Alpine, as we know, the French team, Renault Works team, haven't exactly had the best of starts this time around, but they have looked very much on the pace, and as we can see, they are going to be starting in the top 10. Esteban Ocon in 8th, Alonso unfortunately in 10th because he ended up suffering something of a crash, couldn't set a flying lap, so he is by default 10th, but at one point it looked like he may well park his car on the first or second row. As for the Mercedes, well, the defending Constructors' Champions continued their struggle somewhat. Their car has been suffering with what experts are calling porpoising, the constant bouncing of the car due to the new aerodynamic rules, and they have been struggling for pace, but they'll be pretty happy with how well they've done. Lewis Hamilton is on 5th, his teammate George Russell 6th. The two McLarens will be very happy. In fact, McLaren's sudden surge back to form was an interesting talking point for many. How is it that a team that was struggling in the bottom half are suddenly looking like world beaters in Australia? Well, the reason for that is fairly simple. The Albert Park circuit as of now has only, I think, 4 major braking zones. So McLaren's major problem came from the braking zones, from the brakes. They were constantly overheating, and thus they had to be keeping off of them as much as was possible. Here, they didn't have to do that as much, so you can see that it's reflected, and they are in a much better position. Lando Norris is in 4th on the second row. In fact, fun stat about Lando, this is the first time since 2014 when a certain Kevin Magnussen started in 4th that a McLaren will be starting on the second row of the grid in Australia. Lando Norris is going to be in 4th. His teammate and local hero Daniel Ricciardo is starting in 7th. So, good race weekend ahead for McLaren, could very well be possible, but that midfield battle, aside from the battle between the top 2, is going to be one to watch out for. Now, obviously, there were a few major losers around this time as well, and when I say losers, I'm not being derogatory, I'm just talking about teams who did not possibly perform to the best of their ability. If we look at the bottom half, I mean, you would expect a lot of these teams, at least certain of these drivers, to be higher than they are. Pierre Gasly, a consistent performer in Q3, in whole of 2021, starts 11th. Valtteri Bottas, in fact, interestingly, 2 things about Valtteri Bottas. One, he was the man who won the last race for Mercedes. In fact, the last race that took place in Australia when he was still a Mercedes driver. And the fact that he finished 12th also ended his streak of 103 times making it to Q3, which is an F1 record. Yuki Tsunoda, Gasly's AlphaTauri teammate, in 13th, so bad day all round for the AlphaTauris. Valtteri Bottas' Alfa Romeo teammate Zhu Guanyu only made it to 14th. So again, pretty mixed weekend for the Alfa Romeos, who with that new Ferrari power unit were looking like a force to beat. But the other Ferrari team arguably struggled even more, and that of course is Haas. Because you had Mick Schumacher, who only made it the 15th fastest. His teammate Kevin Magnussen, who's had 2 points finishes to this point, only managed P17. Bit of a disappointment for K-Mag, but those horses didn't quite look like they were up for the pace all weekend. Alex Albon and Nicholas Latifi in Williams, 16th and 19th. Latifi, in fact, couldn't actually get a lap in after a point because of a major shunt that happened between him and Lance Stroll. And Lance Stroll, FYI, will be starting in 20th because, again, he couldn't set a time. And Sebastian Vettel is another one who many people thought they might or might not be able to actually get a time going, because obviously the Aston Martins had a lot of struggle in free practice, but they managed to get his car running, and thanks in no small part to a red flag that came about in Q1, qualifier 1. He managed to get a lap time in, but only good for 18th fastest. Now, obviously, it's going to be an interesting grid in that regard, because, you know, a lot of these teams, like obviously, yeah, Williams and Aston Martin were in and about the bottom parts of the grid, and, you know, people didn't really expect them to suddenly get, you know, a certain amount of, let's say, they didn't expect them to make massive improvements, but it's still not a good look for them. The Alfa Romeos and the Haas are struggling for pace. Bit of a shock that, you know, they were looking pretty fast in the first 2 races. Haven't quite looked as fast this time around. Will they be able to make that up with race pace? It's too soon to tell. I guess you'll have to tune into the race to find that out tomorrow. And obviously, you know, if you're looking at other teams, which is a bit of a shock, the AlphaTauris, which are of course Red Bull powered and were consistent point scorers in the previous season, well, they're not really up to scratch this time around, are they? Because they haven't really been doing as well. They were pretty much struggling to even make it to Q2 at one point. They somehow made it, but again, those timings are not a reflection of where the team or where even Red Bull would want their sister team to be. So, I mean, a lot of improvement has to come. Will that come in this race? I guess we'll not know for sure. And of course, because as I said, that the Albert Park track has a new layout, so there were going to be a few problems that the drivers had when it came to how they drove or what kind of setups they chose. Some drivers were very much on the limit, others very much over the limit. As I discussed, a big crash in Q1 between Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi. Latifi's car got a big shunt, and well, it seems it's going to cost the Williams team a lot of money to actually repair that car, because the back wing completely flew off, the wheels flew off. Stroll himself suffered some damage, but I think his car should be okay to go. There was that crash. There was also a crash which Fernando Alonso suffered in the final qualifier Q3. Thus, he was actually unable to set a lap time because his crash came late and he could not actually, you know, set a lap time afterwards. That's why he starts in 10th. But at one point, it looked like he was going to be setting a faster time than he was. The Alonso crash, interestingly, had 2 other unfortunate victims, let's say. One of them was Carlos Sainz, who was on course to put on a very fast lap, but had to abort the lap due to red flags being shown. And George Russell, who was again putting in an absolute fly in a Mercedes that has proved very difficult to drive. You know, he was putting in a good lap, but again had to abort it. And then once the red flags had been removed, once the session was restarted, then he only managed a lap time that was good enough for P6, 1 place behind teammate Lewis Hamilton, who currently is of course 5th. So qualifying was definitely fun. Even in free practice, you saw teams experiment a lot with their setups, because, you know, Albert Park there's a new track layout. It's supposed to be faster. It indeed did look a lot faster than it has looked in previous years. 4 DRS zones, going to be a lot more overtaking. And of course, you know, the race is going to be an exciting one for sure. Don't forget to join us tomorrow post-race, when we will be live discussing the race and the reactions. Wait, I'll just take a quick question. Ayan Mehti is asking, is this the 3rd F1 race of the season? That would be correct. There have been 2 this far. There was the season opener in Bahrain, and the second race of the season took place in Saudi Arabia. This is in fact going to be the first day race of this season, and it's in very good times if you're joining us from India, of course. Timings are great to be watching. What better way to spend your Sunday mornings than watching F1? I know that's what I'll be doing. And do please join us if you enjoyed this conversation. Do join us after the race, because we will be discussing and dissecting everything that happened live. This has been Shane Dias from Sports Today. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be seeing you very soon, because we are going to be going live to discuss the IPL. It's a big midday today, double header, 2 matches, 2 very exciting matches. Do join us in just about a minute's time. Thank you very much. Goodbye for now.